and welcome to the Convex Conversation with me, broadcaster Helen Fospero. Channel 4's new docudrama, Dirty Business, is largely based on a decade-long investigation into England's water companies by two friends. It's a dramatisation of the real-life story of how retired detective Ashley Smith and his neighbour, Professor of Computational Biology Peter Hammond, uncovered the illegal dumping of raw sewage by water companies in some of Britain's waterways.
We can't treat sewage without any power. We're dumping it straight into the river.
We've got to get this to the Environment Agency.
We want to strip out as much unnecessary regulation as possible.
You want water companies to monitor their own pollution.
These aren't accidents. It's a policy.
In 2024, there were nearly 1 million sewage dumps in the UK. That's one every 30 seconds. Ash and Peter began investigating when stretches of the beautiful river Windrush near their homes in Oxfordshire started turning brown. The three-part drama reveals how they began putting the pieces together, using sophisticated machine learning to interpret complex data, challenging water companies and the government's Environment Agency with evidence, and ending up giving evidence in Parliament. Whistleblowers helped as the truth emerged, and the drama shows how some people's lives have been destroyed after encountering sewage-polluted water. Professor Hammond is played by Jason Watkins, and Ash, who joins me now, is played by Harry Potter star David Thewlis. Ash, welcome to the Convex Conversation.
Hi.
Hi there. It's not every day that you see your story at the heart of a television drama. It's an eye-opening, disturbing and shocking tale. Tell me more.
Where do you start with that? We were clearly a little bit interested, but also a little bit apprehensive about engaging with the production team. And that started about 2 years ago because you're throwing your kind of work and your life into the hands of people who are going to interpret it and put it on the TV. So it's kind of worrying how it's going to work out. But we really like the way they researched with such meticulous enthusiasm for detail and to get to the bottom of the stories, because that's the way we work. We've always based our work on hard evidence because we had to prove such a deep-rooted lie about how the water industry was being run and to expose all of this. So we really liked it when we spoke to Joe Bullman, the writer, director, and Laura McCutcheon, a co-producer, and they were just insistent that we just had everything laid out either in the emails that we'd sent all the data that we'd analysed, and we were able to provide video evidence. So they were very happy about that because, of course, their lawyers were very worried about engaging with quite a litigious organisation that's got a huge amount of money, our money, by the way, that they used
that's right.
to protect themselves from exposure by us, which is a great irony. But the lawyers were satisfied to put out what you see on Dirty Business.
And how involved have you and Peter then been in the production and the preparation of it?
We just told them how it was. We told them we've done this for 10 years. So what you see there is not 10 years of work. It's a sample of what we've done over that period of time that represents it. And we identified the lines that they thought would work. And we just told them what happened, really, showed them what happened. And we were mystified. How do you do that? How, as somebody who's making those sort of pieces of factual drama, how do you actually make that work? How do you draw in stories from around the rest of the country and make it something that is intelligible and engaging? Now we know the answer to that question. It's like that. And it's a very interesting watch.
I think we also saw that with the post office story, the dramatisation of that, and how sometimes it takes a dramatisation to get a really important story out there. It did remind me of that a little bit, Ash.
Yeah, our first venture into the media was on BBC Country Files. So we went in quite big from the start. That gets a lot of attention. And we've been on Panorama, various other documentaries, Riverside with George Monbiot, with Joe Crowley on ITV, as well as BBC, loads of news, loads of articles in newspapers. And we've had a lot of exposure and we've had a lot of response to that, but nothing like we had. When this aired, our website contact went crazy. The emails were coming in. At one point, they were coming in like 3 a minute, were rolling in all night long. And it was great. Very interesting people, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of anger, a lot of, it's exactly what happened to me stories. I'm so glad someone's exposing it. A lot of experiences, a lot of information came from around the country as well. And over that period, I think we picked up over 1,200 messages, which is a lot.
That's incredible. But again, a little bit like the post office, people think these things happen in isolation. So I suppose when they see something like Dirty Business on the television, they're like, gosh, that's exactly what happened to me. And your website you're talking about, this is Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, isn't it? Which you're the co-founder of.
That's it. The site is called windrushwasp.org. And we try to keep that so that it can help people. We want to help people make their own groups as well now. People are saying, what can we do to help? And we're basically a bunch of retired specialists, like a hub of people from various walks of life that have got relevant skills. None of us are paid. We don't work that way, which also means that we get people that we couldn't afford to pay anyway because they're at the top of their game. And we investigate, we expose the reality, and we try to communicate to the media to get the public properly educated in this so that they can make the proper decisions about what is going on in our world. But we were trying to encourage a movement of people around the country as part of the Sewage Campaign Network. There's a little website for that as well, where with groups from Windermere, Save Windermere, Ilkley Clean River Group, and SOS Whitstable and others. You can see it on Sewage Campaign Network. And now there are loads of little groups that have started to form around that. And that really manifested itself well. On Tuesday, we did a drop-in for MPs in Parliament, in the Houses of Parliament. Normally, you might expect, 30 MPs to turn up. That would be pretty good. Over 117 apparently came through that process. And the knock-on effect of raising the profile has been remarkable. And the great thing about that was we had groups that are part of the Sewage Campaign Network, and it's a really loose coalition. It's just there to support people. We don't want to speak for people. We want to help people speak for themselves and how to find out what they need to find out about their own area and how to engage with their own MPs. We really want a group in every constituency in the country to make sure that their MPs know the truth, not what's been drummed into them by years and years of water company lobbying that's persuading them that it's too expensive to do this job other than by employing huge financial predators to look after it. That hasn't really worked since 1989. We're looking for a massive change, and those groups are able to engage in a more personal level with their MPs rather than us trying to speak to all of them. So it was a spectacular success, really buzzing day that.
That must have been incredible to see the reaction, and really well deserved, because as we'll hear as the story emerges, it started as a local story, and I think it's grown in a way that you perhaps had no idea it would grow. In broad terms, perhaps for those who haven't had a chance to see Dirty Business yet, what has yours and Peter's investigation really brought to light? So
it started back in 2016, end of 2016. I moved here near to the River Windrush in Oxfordshire, West Oxfordshire, sort of west of Witney. And I'd spent my life around rivers. I used to be a really keen angler. And then I did a lot of scuba diving and a lot of underwater photography. And I knew rivers very well. I knew where the fish should be. I knew what the life should look like, what the plant life should look like. And I knew the Windrush had a fantastic reputation as a beautiful thing, described as many as like an aquarium back in the day. Absolutely fantastic piece of water. When I came here, I thought, it's okay. It's not that great. There was a little bit of flowering ranunculus weed. It's that long streamer weed that you see in rivers that's very full of life, holds the invertebrate life and is a great cover for fish and the things that they feed on. There was a bit of that. But bearing in mind that this situation where we are here near to a weirpool, nowhere near enough of it. Didn't know what to make of that. I first started off for the first 2-3 years rebuilding a house here, doing a major renovation. So I didn't have time to do much other than walk the dogs over the river every day. And in that time, even, I saw, first of all, some big fish spawning under the bridge this time of year, actually. It's around about now, in sort of March. There was some barbel. I think there were 5 barbel came up and a couple of chub, and rolling over on the gravel, and you can see there's flanks flashing in the light. And that's normal. I thought I've seen that many times. I thought there's not that many, but there's some. Then the next year, 3 barbel came along, and the following year, nothing came along. And I've seen not one since spawning like that. Don't see many fish either, where you should see great shoals of minnows and see a lot of fish moving around. There were some trout kicking around, and they were stocking trout for a long time. But the normal coarse fish input is very poor. You just don't see them. And also, you don't see the plant life. The plant life is virtually gone. In fact, it has gone in this stretch, completely gone. And so I started to ask the Environment Agency questions about that. And I had great expectations that they would be interested and would have a lot of knowledge and it would all be right. And that evaporated quite quickly, and particularly after I was told by someone from the agency that Thames Water had been dumping untreated sewage just upstream from here at Burford, about less than a mile upstream. And it was due to heavy rainfall. And I thought, it wasn't really. It was some rain. It wasn't a lot of rain. But I was just shocked that they could dump untreated sewage for a number of hours. It seemed like really unreasonable. We were so far behind what was really going to emerge, how bad it really was. But even that at the beginning was enough to shock me and make me start asking questions and using the law, using the Freedom of Information law. So you have the Freedom of Information Act and you have the Environmental Information Regulations, hard-won laws that allow people like us, ordinary people, to get information out of corporations like public bodies, and the water industry is regarded as a public body for that purpose. So they told me, yes, I asked the question, how many times has this happened in the Windrush in the last 3 years? And they told me it was about 240 times. I thought, wow, actually, wow. And started to talk to other neighbours and people in the area about it to see if it was just me and that was okay, or if other people thought that was also unacceptable. And we started to engage with Thames Water. They then said, oh, we made a mistake with that. It's not really 240, it's more like 50. It didn't really matter, frankly, because 50 was also a ridiculous number in our view. And it turned out to be, of course, much worse. So investigation started to develop from that, starting to look initially at how the rivers were being damaged and the environmental aspects of that. And then we started to realize that the Environment Agency controlled the truth about how rivers were. So they would say the river Windrush is in moderate status, it's stable, and there's basically nothing to worry about. And that was basically the first response we had from an environment minister about that. Basically, go away, stop bothering us. Everything's fine. The Environment Agency's got it under control. But our own eyes and noses could tell us that wasn't true. And a little bit of research showed us that wasn't how it was. It has really taken a massive hit. It was a fantastically beautiful river. And very quickly, in fact, probably since about 2009, when it really started to go downhill, there's been a massive change. So we have pictures that we can show people, and we do often show people of the river in 2009 nearby here, and exactly the same spot in 2017 onwards, and more recently, exactly the same. One is lovely, the other is horrible. It's gone from absolutely beautiful with clear green, beautiful weed with some ducks swimming above it, clean water, to basically grey, lifeless, horrible. It looks like something in a drain.
Your neighbour, Professor Peter Hammond, has been your partner in crime, if you like, on this. You've worked together very hard. He's a very clever man, as are you. Tell me a bit about Peter and some incredible skills that he's brought to the table once you approached Thames Water about the situation and were just flooded, really, with information under that Freedom of Information Act that I presume they thought you'd never be able to interpret.
Yeah, we knew each other back then, but we were both retired from our previous careers, and neither of us were kind of inclined to say, guess what, I used to do this. So we didn't really know anything about each other in that respect, just normal conversations about things. But when I first started to get the information from the water company, they started sending me data. And this, I understand now, was a tactic used at the time. You could comply with the Environmental Information Regulations and the Freedom of Information Law by giving the public the information. There's nothing to say that you had to make it actually that intelligible. So they gave me huge numbers of values of flow data that would answer my questions about how sewage works were performing. But I looked at those spreadsheets and thought, yes, I wish I'd paid more attention in maths at school. And I hadn't. And I sent it to Peter, and I didn't know this, but he worked for the Big Data Institute. Data analysis was his thing. His skills were recognized later by the Environmental Audit Committee that came here to speak to us, that his data analysis was superior to that of the regulators, which are massively funded. And he just sits there in his own office with his own computer and analyzes it. And he started to be able to visualize that for me. So he could say, no, hey, those numbers are showing that the sewage works performing like this. You have peaks and troughs in the performance. This is what they should look like in these particular areas. They all have a sort of fairly unique footprint. And he started to use the shape analysis that he'd used in previous work over examining the shapes of children's faces, the profiles of children's faces, to identify various aspects of fetal alcohol syndrome in his previous job. And he applied that to this analysis. He explains that much better than I do, by the way.
It was ladies in abroad, isn't it, who were paid in alcohol for the work they did, and then who went on to have children who had deformities because of that alcohol. I don't know if that explains it any better, but that's what I got from the drama, that he used those techniques on the sewage works results.
Yeah, that's right. There are certain facial features that people get that indicate certain syndromes, genetic syndromes that they have. And he used that in this respect. And he was able to then identify huge numbers of illegal sewage pollution events. So we started looking hard at the law. What were they allowed to do? When were they allowed to do it? I mean, at the same time, around about the time we were doing this, the Environment Agency, I do clearly remember when we started pushing this stuff out, the chair of the Environment Agency was Emma Howard Boyd, and she challenged the Times newspaper that had put out an article revealing some of this stuff and said, basically, your article, I think it was called Filthy Business, interestingly enough, is completely wrong. In fact, rivers have never been in a better state since before the Industrial Revolution, which is hilarious. And water companies are highly regulated and they're required to obey their permits by the Environment Agency. And they do that most of the time. Roughly those were words. Completely not true in any respect, but that's what the message was coming out of the regulators at that time. Now a laughable statement, but that's what we were up against, because we were just a bunch of amateur kind of authority botherers, an amateur group out in Oxfordshire revealing this stuff. And then it goes on to the TV, and then the authority of the Environment Agency comes out and says to the public, no, they're absolutely wrong. So, who are people going to believe at that stage? So it was a long journey to prove that actually we were the people telling the truth, and we always have. We were the people giving accurate information, and we always have. And it was actually the water companies and the regulators that were making stuff up, misrepresenting things, and obstructing the laws. In fact, all of them have been found recently by the Office for Environmental Protection, which is supposed to supervise the regulators. They've found that the actions of DEFRA itself, the government department responsible for all this, the Environment Agency and Ofwat, have all been in breach of the law. The people that are not in breach of the law is the campaigners. We like to keep it like that.
We'll explore a little later the relationship between the Environment Agency and the water companies, which in itself is a whole podcast and documentary, really. But it seemed to me in the drama as if at the beginning, Thames Water were trying to be helpful. So by sending all this data through, which presumably they thought you wouldn't be able to interpret. But also, didn't they invite you to look around a treatment's works? And I just wondered if you could describe what that was like, because I gather it wasn't manned, was it, when you went to have a look round one? It sort of sits there doing its job, but weren't there no people there?
Yeah, that's the case for most of them, actually.
Is it?
Not many of them are permanently staffed. Things were from privatisation, from before privatisation, when the industry was being starved of money to soften it up for privatisation. The staffing was cut right back. People that remember the former days remember that it was not very well financed. It was enthusiastically led, so that if people wanted to do the right thing, they did the right thing. If they needed to fix something properly, they did it. The funding was then cut out so that privatisation could come in. And when that took over, the whole aspect of the way things were run was all about saving money. It was all about extracting as much money as possible. And this is even a feature of the Thames Water independent assessment that was done for its High Court proceedings in its kind of financial shambles that it's in at the moment. It commissioned a report, and the report said, since privatisation, Thames Water concentrated on extracting dividends, pretty much forgot it had a job to do in providing water and sewerage. That's paraphrasing it. It's page 91 of the Kroll report, if anyone wants to check. And it says that, which is quite a damning and shocking thing. So we went to this sewage works. This is where, Ash, it's supposed to be treated, isn't it? I mean, sewage is treated. That's what happens, isn't it, at the treatment works? Yeah. So basically, when this is, it's probably not something people think about, shouldn't really have to think about. But when you run the sink or flush the toilet, whatever, that liquid, whatever's in that, goes to the sewage works, goes either by gravity or through a series of pumping stations or both to a sewage treatment works where it's supposed to have some stages of treatment. First one is to settle it so that let's be polite, the heavy organic matter and things that people shouldn't put down the toilet, filtered out, screened out, and then settled out. And then the treatment continues in broad terms so that basically oxygen in the form of air is introduced into the liquid, or it goes through some filter beds. You often see these circular filter beds with a rotating arm on them so that they're spreading out the liquid and giving a high surface area to allow oxygen to feed bacteria. And the bacteria break down what's in the sewage so that basically by the time it comes out of the sewage works, it should be. They talk about the cleaned water is returned to the river. Now, that is such a misrepresentation of the truth. It should not be allowed, but you'll find it on Ofwat documentation, water companies and the rest. Yes, it can look like clear liquid. It doesn't even often have to always look like clear liquid. When you actually look at it in a glass or through a camera, which is often what we use, underwater camera, you'll see lots of things coming out along with that. But it could and should be clear liquid, but it will not have removed the bacteria, the E. coli bacteria, including resistant to antibiotics bacteria. It won't have removed pharmaceuticals. It won't have removed hormones and other drugs and chemicals, and forever chemicals. So it's not the sort of thing where you get anyone standing there. I think historically people have said they've seen people then going to the outfall from the sewage works and the people working there drinking a glass of that. I've heard of that being done. No one in their right mind is going to do that.
But what we're talking about here is sewage that hasn't gone through that process being released into the waterways. And what was it like when you went to that treatment works? It looked very old and abandoned to me. Yeah,
that was a set. That was a film set, of course. They couldn't film in a real sewage works.
But was it quite accurate though?
They vary. I've been to some really awful ones, and we always say this is not the fault of the people that work in the water industry, and we admire what they do. And the character that you see in that, Mickey Lazarus, is a composite character. Interesting, because a friend of mine's been trying to introduce me to someone in the industry for a while, and then this program came on, and he said, that character, that's my friend. So, in terms of it represented the people that the producers of Dirty Business had seen. It also, maybe that is a characteristic. People who are working in a hard job, working hard, wading sometimes through stuff they shouldn't be wading through. The worst place I've seen, actually, is at a place called South Moreton near Didcot. And it's a small sewage works, and that's not staffed. The people go there when they have to for various reasons. If an alarm goes off, otherwise the thing just operates on its own. There was sewage running down the side of the building that housed the office that those people had to work in. And it was running all over the car park. They would walk through sewage into their office and then it would be running down the wall on the outside. And things are crumbling and broken. It's funny, isn't it? Because you go to the headquarters of something like Thames Water and it's lovely. It's all very glossy and marvellous. And the chief executive sits in a lovely place. And he was film watching the cricket for the documentary while waiting for a decision from the regulator about how much money they would get. And they take huge bonuses. Meantime, these people that are actually doing the job are trying to put things together and hold them together without the financial support that they need to do it. So it's quite common things will break and they won't be fixed for a year or two because they don't keep any spare parts. Because that's a typical thing with private equity running anything. If you don't need to do it, you don't do it. If you don't have to do that, you don't spend money on it. And this is what we were told. I've been told this by two senior executives from Thames Water. We had a policy, and they still do, of sweating the assets. And that means you don't fix anything. You let it go until it's right on its last legs or beyond that. And if you're not going to get prosecuted enough for it to be cheaper to fix the thing that's broken, then they will just not fix it. So that's why we have examples of pumping stations being broken. There was the worst one I know of was Weston on the Green, near to here, north of Oxford, that was broken for 11 years. And they were using tankers to take the sewage from there and take them to the place that the pump would have pumped them to. Tankers with driving tankers. And then they talk about their carbon footprint and how they can't fix things because they don't want to use carbon. But they're quite happy to have a tanker There was a young boy on the news clip when they finally fixed it, just before they had fixed it, saying, I'm 11 years old and it's always been like this in my lifetime.
Oh my goodness.
It's just appalling.
The engineer that we saw in the drama was a whistleblower in the drama. You did have somebody come forward from the inside, didn't you, from Thames Water to tell you about the realities of what was really going on?
So we never talk about how we engage with confidential sources, and the way that the dramatic device to use the engagement is that it's a dramatic device. Initially, it was started off as well, hiding the identity of the whistleblower that had been speaking directly to the production team and making him a woman because he was a man. And then at the end of it, he's a very brave guy. And at the end of it, he decided, I'm actually not going to hide my identity now. He identified himself and he wanted to be identified. So in the end credits, you actually learn who he is. So those interactions, that is a device because, and I want to give people confidence that you can talk to us and tell us things and you won't see yourself represented on television in any way.
No.
We talk to various people, but that sums up the essence of the information, the truth, the stuff that you then see depicted, said by the whistleblower is then acted out. So those are real things that have been described to a degree and proven to a degree that satisfied the lawyers, of course.
Can you give us an idea, Ash, how bad the sewage pollution is in England and anything that gives us an idea of scale? I think somewhere I've written down 240 Olympic-sized swimming pools of sewage in one day, and I'm not quite sure I've scribbled that on the side of my notes. So the honest truth is I'm not sure quite what I'm referring to there, but just to give people the idea of the scale, once you started digging and uncovering things, how bad is this situation?
I think you can talk about these huge numbers, like 3 million hours of untreated sewage and year this and year that, but they don't really do it for you. I think what you need to do probably is look at one of the maps. There are a number of maps. One is by something called sewagemap.co.uk. That's an easy one to remember. And also another good one is called Top of the Poops.
That's a good name.
Very good. Really slick. Honestly, very good website that links you to your own constituency. And also the Rivers Trust does a good one that shows you how frequently various sewage works have spilled untreated sewage in the previous year, and have a different size brown circle to show how bad that's been. And when you're looking at it on a small scale, they amalgamate those things and that circle is appropriately large. And you'll just be surprised how brown England and Wales are, because these are covering England and Wales. It's shocking. And you'll see how many there are that are performing not in exceptional circumstances, not for very short periods of time, but far too frequently and for far too long. And the industry was made to publish this information and was made to measure when they start dumping untreated sewage. And they hate me saying dumping, but I keep saying dumping because that's what it is. They like to say spilling as if it's some kind of thing, like you've just, on your way into the living room, your cup of tea has spilled a little bit. It was an accident. It's not like that. It's a conscious decision taken at board level that water sewage treatment works will operate like this. Let's not pretend it isn't. So it happens a lot, and you can see how it happens in your own area. And it's supposed to happen in exceptional circumstances. To start with, this only happens for a few hours while the rivers are high and sewage is quickly taken away. DEFRA put that video out saying that's how things happen. I had to really argue with the chief executive of the Environment Agency to take that down. I said, that's just a blatant and complete lie. You're lying to the public. You know that's not true. And eventually they took it down because the truth is the spilling goes on. And it's not to stop it backing up into people's homes. It's to cover up for the fact that water industry has not invested the money that it's been given by the public to do this, the customer to do this. It's used it to take away for shareholders and paying for loans that it doesn't need and for funding huge, ridiculous bonuses for chief executives. When we first did this, we found a sewage works. And when we went on Country File, we'd got 7 days in a row, 24 hours a day. And we thought, wow, that's massive. That's crazy. But then we found Whitney and Broughton on the Water with different data were spilling for roughly between 3 and 4 months, absolutely non-stop, with a few little breaks in between, but mostly for 3 or 4 months. And in that time, in Whitney, the brook that it dumps into, let's be clear, going down to the River Windrush, about 1.6 kilometres, was absolutely full of something called sewage fungus. So all the fish are driven away. They often escape ahead of it, go into the main river. Not always. Sometimes they die. There are effects that kills all the invertebrate life, a lot of the invertebrate life, and it's hugely damaging to have that sort of level of pollution. And the sewage fungus is the telltale for that. It's a filamentous bacteria. It looks like the sort of thing you find in a drain if you have to clean out a drain. That is going into watercourses, and then it spreads into the rest of the river. And as you see, if you watch Dirty Business, the consequences of engaging with that stuff as a human or an other animal can be really serious, because sometimes the bacteria can either make you very sick, or really wrong end of it with something called E. coli 0157, you can get kidney failure and die.
E. coli 0157 is what little Heather got, isn't it, many years ago, a little 8-year-old who played on a beach where there was raw sewage. The documentary broke my heart with that story. Just tell us, I know you weren't involved in that story. It was many years before you started investigating, but will you just recap a little bit of that story just to explain how devastating it can be? And that poor family, that was a blue flag beach. The battle they had to have the beach closed down while the investigation went on was insane. I remember the mum giving evidence at an inquiry and saying, I don't want your money. I just want the beach closed down because my little girl's not here anymore. I think she said we went to the beach as a family of 4 and we came back as a family of 3. But will you just remind us of their story, Ash?
Yes. And I've been talking to Heather's mum, Julie Morn, now for about a year around the evidence that was given at the inquest, because that investigation was very shallow into what happened at the time and avoided actually the real issues that should have been looked at, in my opinion. We're still working on that, so that's come back. They went on holiday to Dawlish, and they went there on a budget. They went there because they thought it was safe, because it had a blue flag status for the beach. I won't give away the actual stuff for watching Dirty Business, but Heather got sick. People thought, okay, she's got a bit of sickness that then didn't go away. Then it turned into kind of diarrhea and blood, and it ended up with her in hospital. And she went there with her sister and her parents, and she died. And her mum was just, bewildered, and so was her father. And her father took it very hard, because nobody was thinking about sewage pollution. They were talking about all sorts of other things, and you'll see that. So that's another piece of work. And Julie is very now, after all these years, she's very robust. She's lived through that, and she does not want Heather to have died in vain. So she wants to make sure this can't happen again. And the connections between sewage and these sort of deaths is tenuous, because they're not made. It's not that they didn't happen. It's that they're not looked for often. So looking at others, and other examples have come to light since the program. People are talking to us. They're sending us information about other events that happen to themselves or other people in terms of that E. coli 0157. And we're dealing with them. And if people do that, we will respond appropriately and always discuss what we might do with them before we would do anything with that information. But there's a lot of information out there.
The water companies obviously are huge in your 10-year investigation, but so is the Environment Agency. And for those that might be listening to this who aren't aware of the government's Environment Agency or their official role, what is the official role that they're supposed to do, and the relationship one would expect them to have with the water companies?
They are there to regulate the environmental performance of the water companies, and they're governed under law. So when they break the law, the Environment Agency should prosecute them. They've been misinterpreting the law and softening it down to just what's required in their permits. But nevertheless, they still break those laws. Like, give you an example. Even though the Environment Agency prosecutes only the most serious offences, so they have to have fish dead or a serious environmental impact, that has to be the case for a prosecution to take place, or even an investigation to take place in most cases. Thames Water have still picked up 180 criminal convictions. 180, right? But, of course, that behaviour, because they don't prosecute most of these things, which are caused by underinvestment, I would say, as a broad reason, that's a profitable activity. So very cynically, these water companies have just carried on doing it because it makes money. That's how they make money. I put a blog on our website called The Proceeds of Crime that explains exactly why that is the case. No one's pushing back on me about that, because it sets out really clearly why they couldn't make money without carrying on breaking the law. If they spent the money to fix the things that are breaking the law, they wouldn't have the money to take away as dividends or bonuses. Therefore, the money they are making is because of the crimes they're committing.
So you mean it's cheaper to pay the fines than it is to actually put things right? Because you've likened this to an organised crime syndicate, haven't you?
David Thewlis did, yes. But those are words, those are the sort of words I was using to Joe Billman, the writer. Indeed, I was talking to him about the proceeds of crime for a long time, and that these are organisations that are doing this on purpose. Companies don't just operate on their own. They have people who are highly paid. We keep hearing, you have to attract in the greatest talent by paying them these ridiculous fees. Like Severn Trent's boss was getting over £3 million a year to do this. The Thames Water bosses have commonly had multi-million pound payments. And yet they've managed to drive Thames Water off a financial cliff, despite having 16 million customers who have to pay them enough to do the job because that's agreed by Ofwat every year. They've still been so greedy that they've pushed it off a cliff. So the Environment Agency is supposed to regulate the environmental side of it, with Ofwat regulating the economic side of it. But Thames Water was fined £20 million in 2017, and everyone thought, wow. And Sir James Bevan, the head of the agency, chief exec at the time, said, that will teach them, right? So it did teach them, taught them this, because I looked up what that meant. And in the time that they'd picked up those fines by breaking the law, the amount of money they'd made in taking out dividends and paying bonuses in that time meant that the £20 million fine was roughly 2.4% of that money.
Wow.
Okay. So that was just like saying, we've kind of put that through PayPal then, haven't we? 2.4%. And it did teach them something. It taught them carry on. That's the way to go. And that naivety in the regulators is stunning because it's obvious. Eventually, Southern Water got fined £90 million. Has it adjusted their behaviour? No. And the fundamental reason for all of that is that when those fines are levied, the actual people paying those fines are you and I, the customers, because the only source of money going into water companies is customer bills. We pay for everything. This is the biggest scam, the biggest con trick that lies behind privatised water of all. It's supposed to be about attracting in private equity to bring in big lumps of money that we would pay a fair return on, right? We've just been paying an unfair return on them investing our money. So when you hear, the privatised water industry has invested over £200 billion since privatisation, the truth is the privatised water industry has spent over £200 billion of customers' money and charged an absolute fortune. It's charged 85 billion thereabouts to do that. So at one point when I was calculating it, they basically charged us about 45 pence in the pound for every pound of our money that they'd invested. Now that ought to sound like a huge scam that we should have stopped a long time ago to everybody. And that's what it is.
David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, I've seen news footage of him quite proudly getting rid of a lot of regulation. And I think one of the aspects or parts of regulation he got rid of was to do with the Environment Agency. And I think at one stage they announced that they were going to let the water companies self-regulate. To me, that sounds like putting the mouse in charge of the cheese. Is that in fact what actually happened with the Environment Agency? There was an expectation that the water companies would come forward and say, whoops, sorry, had a big sewage leak.
Yeah, 100%. That's what they do. It's called operator self-monitoring. They are supposed to monitor the standards of their effluent and also to self-report when they pollute. So that's what happens. So they will, not always, they have a percentage that they will report, and they're measured on the percentage that they report. So that's how stupid it was. And we challenged that with the boss of the Environment Agency, the new chair, he's been there for 3 years and he's about to go now. But we said when he arrived, that's just ludicrous, operator self-monitoring. And he said, no, but we do audits. So it's not like we just let them do it. We check to see how well they've done every year, right? So I thought, it's interesting. So I did an investigation into that and found out that they'd missed a third of their audits. And the audits that they'd done in many cases were so pathetically inadequate. In fact, one of them, I think, for United Utilities said, we don't see any reason why we should challenge what the water companies are saying. There's no evidence to say that they're saying anything inaccurate, not having checked to see if there was. So we won't do one. I mean, you couldn't make this up. This would be like ludicrous. And you would think in any other organisation, the people saying that would just be fired and saying, you're clearly not cut out for this line of work. If you've got no professional curiosity whatsoever and you're just happy to take nonsense that's fed to you, then you're in the wrong line of work. But no, they're actually in the right line of work for the way that the boss wanted that organisation to be run.
The Environment Agency, I think, eventually had to release EDM numbers, data which showed that water companies discharged raw sewage 400,000 times in 2020. That's 1,100 times a day for a total of 3.1 million hours. But I just wondered how the Environment Agency reacted when you showed them Peter's machine learning analysis that he did himself along with other scientists, which showed that there had been hundreds of illegal spills. What did they say to that, Ash?
We soon found out that, surprisingly, our efforts to help them to see what was going on in various areas were not actually that welcome, that they were more inclined to side with the water industry. They were far more transparent and communicative with the people breaking the law than they were with us. I think it's fairly sound to say that, I've been obstructed along the way, just routinely obstructed from getting information from the Environment Agency. We've had to draw it out of them like pulling teeth. It's really been difficult, and it still is. They're still hiding information. So it wasn't welcome. This is not a reflection on everybody. Some people, as we see from the whistleblower and from others, that people that we know that work really hard in that agency. But as an organisation, I would say I've never experienced anything like it in my professional life. Very strange, dysfunctional organisation that's all about hiding behind walls to prevent people seeing what they've been doing. And then we talk about regulatory capture. This is a well-known economic theory where people who are supposed to be regulating organisations become, because they have much more contact with the people they're regulating than the public, they start to form a bond with them, start to have friendships, and worse than that, they start to get employed by them. So one minute you can be working for the agency, next minute you've got a job working for a water company, probably for quite a lot more money. And again, I'm not going to do the spoiler because you've got to watch Dirty Business to see why that is vividly portrayed in a thing that I discovered, along with a bunch of others that are again on our website way back. I put a bunch of things on and I called it something like corruption prevention for the Environment Agency, because it just showed how many conflicts of interest there were. They had a deputy chair of the Environment Agency who was a strategic advisor for an industrial agriculture, a polluting, bad. One was also with a dairy industry that had been fined and was an awful business. There was a strategic advisor. People had shares in water companies. At the beginning, I was told that there were over 200 people in the agency with shares in water companies, what it looked like. But I'm still fighting that battle to find out which of their area directors have got financial interests in water companies. And it's been through a tribunal. A judge has ordered that they do it, and they're still not doing it. They're still not giving it to me. There's a deep-rooted problem that the Environment Agency has, and it comes from the top down. That is how the organisation is led, and is ultimately led by DEFRA, which is government. So we have the perfect mixture for regulatory capture with the Environment Agency, with DEFRA, much more communicative with us, much straighter organisation. Problems, I think, right at the top of the organisation, but the staff that work for that we've always found to be really super helpful and very willing to just put out information that is quite damning about them, but they're prepared to put their hands up about it. That is a problem. So you have regulatory capture, and you can, at the extreme end of that, you've got one end just kind of turning a blind eye and doing the odd favour, and at the top end of regulatory capture, you've got blatant and out corruption. And that's where there should be an investigation. There should be measures taken to prevent that sort of thing. Those are the two extremes of regulatory capture. I'm not saying what we've discovered in those terms at the moment. You can make up your mind from the examples on Dirty Business and the ones we put out into the media. But that is a problem. And it won't go away with the government having plans to now create a super regulator, because it's not addressing the problems that it's got now. And what it's doing next is so sinister, because it's going to be even worse. If they get away with what the government wants to do next, they will be basically making the regulators responsible for the financial success of the industries they're trying to regulate. So if we don't resist that, things are about to get much, much worse, believe it or not.
What needs to be done, Ash? If you were to, have an audience with Sir Keir Starmer, for example, what would you be telling him that needs to be done to try and right all of this?
probably what many people have already told him, but he's also probably listening much more intently to the people that are making a huge amount of money out of us captive customers. The fundamental problem, and we didn't start off like this. We started off with an open mind. We actually started off thinking water companies need some more money from customers like they say they do. It was a chief executive of a water company that said, actually, that's not the issue. And now I know what she meant. It's not that at all. You can give them as much money as they want. They're just going to try and take it away in different ways. The problem is the sole motivating factor for water companies is not to deliver an excellent service and pay a reasonable return to shareholders. It's to take out as much as possible. That's what chief executives get bonuses for. They don't get bonuses for looking after stuff responsibly in some kind of altruistic way that is long left of building. In private equity, ownership means how much money can we make out of this thing without killing it? And when we do decide to kill it, how much money will we make then? And that's the stage that Thames Water is in, that kind of end of exploitation phase. So if you take that away, so it means going back into public ownership is a short answer. I'm not saying nationalisation, because the idea of the government running something doesn't inspire us. But this is not the case. The companies would be, as they are now, entirely funded by bill payers. They'd be run by probably the same people there now, exactly those same people. But the people in charge, their mission would be invest this money wisely, don't overcharge for everything, which is what they do now. Make up numbers. You don't need to make up numbers anymore to falsely inflate the value of your company, which is what they do now. You don't have to do that. The regulatory capital value argument, that's what that is. It's about just doing the job so that all the money that goes in is into one company that manages it well, produces an excellent result, pays its people properly, and delivers a service. Doesn't need, as you see with Thames Water now, about 7 companies stacked on top of the regulated company. There's only one regulated company, Thames Water Utilities Limited. Same with all the others. One regulated company. On top of that, you'll see a stack of other companies, holding companies, this company, that company, that they shuffle money between, all paid for by us. All a way of turning those industries into a cash machine, which was described by Professor David Hall from Greenwich University, and an excellent piece of work done by his PhD student, I think around about 2019, about how the water industry had become a cash machine. And that's exactly what it was. In fact, if you go right back to the beginning, it was assessed by the National Consumer Council in 1993, just 4 years after privatisation. And they were already talking about the £1 billion rip-off and how it had got out of hand. And it needed stronger regulation. And forever, people have been talking about, let's make stronger regulation. There is no regulation that you can make that will beat the most prolific and experienced financial predators in the world. They're the people that own the water industry.
Ash, you've dedicated a decade of your life to this. It started out as a local inquiry and it's grown in an extraordinary way. What drives you to carry on?
Once you're in, you can see how bad it is. There's an obligation to make sure that we see some success. And we've learned a lot about this now. And we're determined to make sure that we get the kind of result that will protect our waters, protect people, and bring a water industry back to this country that we can all be proud of and that everybody will enjoy working for and working with. So if we give up now, what was the point? Once you're in, you can't leave. In your police career, Ash, you were no stranger to investigating corruption and things like that. Have you been able to lean into your experience as a detective as you've been trying to get information that people would much rather you not have? That's kind of a standing joke in dirty business, isn't it? People say to David Thewlis, this must be just like one of your police investigations. And he says, no. So, and there's an element of that with me. I've always tried to keep out of, it was a long time before I've kind of said anything about having a previous career in investigation, because I don't want to do that, because that was another part of my life. I do what I do now, but I can't help but rely on things I learned. I know how to do certain things, and they are a feature of this and then many types of investigation or work. We all carry forward our previous experiences. So yes, and that's kind of a blurry yes, the same sort of blurry yes you get from David Thewlis. And just finally, what did you think to David Thewlis's portrayal of you, and also Jason Watkins as Peter? Because I'm guessing it must have been quite strange for you to actually watch it. It is strange. First of all, I don't watch myself, so I don't know how I am anyway. But the job of the actors was to portray those characters, to kind of capture the essence of that stuff in that very short space of time, because of course we've changed the way we've done things over 10 years. But I think they do really well, really well. You know, we've met them clearly and spoken to them and seen how they've developed those things and joked about this and felt bad about that. They really committed to it. We went onto the set when they were filming for a day, and everybody engaged in that big operation was coming up to us and talking about how they really believed in the piece of work that they were doing. And they really bought into the importance of it. I think that comes through. In fact, I've met the actor. I met Mickey Lazarus, the actor, Asim Chowdhury, and I said to him, look, I feel like I should be talking about water industry stuff with you, because for me, you are working for the water industry. You were so convincing. And the same with Posey Sterling and Tom Mackay, Judy's counterpart, and Heather's parents. They were so convincing, incredibly convincing, that you kind of see them as those real people in that awful situation.
It's an extraordinary story. It's a really important story. And I'd highly recommend anybody listening to this who hasn't seen Dirty Business to watch it. I think everybody should watch it. And, you know, congratulations on what you managed to achieve, Ash, so far. And thank you for sharing with us what you hope to achieve moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, because that's it now. It's not something that's finished. It's a thing that's actually happening now. In fact, it's even more intense now. This is whether it will be made or not, and we've no desire to get on TV or something like that. But we're in the middle of the real Dirty Business 2 right now, and it's even dirtier. Keep us posted, if you will. I will. You've been listening to former detective and environmental campaigner Ash Smith, whose story with his neighbour Peter Hammond is a big part of Channel 4's new 3-part docudrama, Dirty Business. It's a tough programme to watch in places, but as I said just now, I would highly recommend it. Download and subscribe to our series at convex.podbean.com or search The Convex Conversation on Spotify, Apple or wherever you listen to yours. I'll be back next week with football legend Clyde Best, the first black star of Premiership football who led the way for other black players. Clyde is the subject of a new documentary transforming the beautiful game and is over in London for the premiere from Bermuda. Join me then.